Hi, I'm Rigger. This is You Alright, and today we're drowning our sorrows. Before that though, be sure to like the video if you like it, share anything else would like, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and subscribe if you want to see more. Now, as is pretty evident from the title, I think it's time to revisit something I've had a bit of a problem with over the course of my time online talking about RWBY, and that's Qrow's alcoholism. But not for the reasons you might think. See, I've seen both sides of this. I've seen people mad that they made his alcoholism a joke to be a start, like why would you make a joke out of that? And I've seen other people that are mad at the character and haven't forgiven him for letting his alcoholism get the better of him at times, especially during Volume 6. Because really that's where it started becoming an actual issue they were going to address in the show. But I don't have a problem with either of those things. However, since it's the internet, I have to justify what I'm saying, and I very much can. However, I refuse to go into details for personal reasons. But I have stated previously that I have a personal life outside of being a paper cutout, and I have quite a lot of experience with issues involved in pretty severe alcoholism in one way or another, and that's all I'm going to say on it. And of course, you're always free to say that you don't believe me, or your experiences differ, that's fine, but I can only talk about the things that I know. And as always, when you have a more personal connection to a topic, whether it's something you've experienced or people you know have experienced or you just have education on, whatever it might be, well, then you of course pay more attention and are more invested in how it's presented and handled in media, which is only natural, and I recognize that bias in myself here too. Basically what I'm saying is it sort of comes down as representation. If you connect with a thing and you want to see it represented right. But that is also a little unfair of a standard to put on media, to say I'm really invested in this thing so they have to do it exactly right, even when it's not the main point of what's going on, it's just an element involved. And that also puts the weight on creators and writers, saying you have to know how to handle every single possible situation that's even involved slightly in your narrative, all the way up to the level of being on par with people who have been through that thing personally. And if it's the main issue of your show, yeah, you should put in that research, but if it's just a side thing that's in there as part of one character, then maybe not so much, that might be a little unrealistic. And that's always the approach I took. I wasn't mad when they made Qrow an alcoholic as a joke to start, because it was presented in a joking way. It was a character quirk. It wasn't something serious in the show. It was something they were using to make jokes and make a character. And it is something I have strong feelings about, but I knew that it was just there to be a joke, and no matter how attached I am to something, I don't think it's above being a joke. Obviously that's just a personal opinion, you might have a different one. But honestly, I really liked that it started out as a joke and then became a real problem they were talking about later. It actually really works. Because in real life, that's oftentimes how something like that works, where it's just a character trait you know about someone. That's your friend, that's John. He drinks a lot, and he's a really funny guy, and he's snarky. And it's just put in there with one of the things he does. You crack jokes about it, it doesn't really matter that much, and then after a while, when you've either matured or situations have changed, you realize it's a real problem, and suddenly that thing that was once a joke has weight. That's a really good idea to introduce some of these topics. Started out as a joke people might not pay much attention to, and turn it into something serious later, and then thinking back, you think, oh wow, that's been a problem this whole time. That's interesting, that's good. All of that is fine, but where RWBY truly dropped the ball is after they made it real. See, it's a joke until it's not, from the point that you've not made it a joke anymore. After you've moved past the joking stage and it's moved into being a real issue, being portrayed as a coping mechanism, and more blatantly that it's an addiction and something he's struggling with, that's fine, but now it's real, so now you gotta deal with it like a real issue. Now you have to address it. It's too bad Qrow missed out on his last cocktail on the train, because it's the last drink he will ever hold that won't be tinged with negativity and have all of these added emotions on it. However, then they started messing things up, and one of the things they messed up was starting this on the farm, because already Qrow can't really be blamed for his addiction, that's just not how addictions work, so it's an element to his character that he's struggling with, and worse than that, it's all muddied by everyone being here and under the influence of the apathy. Already, Qrow is dealing with his addiction. Then he has his entire worldview destroyed like moments ago, so that's pretty bad. And then he walked into a place with an influence that drains even any more of his motivation that he has left. And he's around his coping mechanism, it's at hand. It's just simply not Qrow's fault, especially in that situation. And it wasn't even just him, obviously. Qrow didn't just oversleep because he was drunk, everyone overslept. They were all losing energy. But what you've done is you've started the discussion about Qrow's alcoholism where RWBY is concerned about him, but now it's muddied because all of his decisions are also influenced by the apathy being there, which just makes everything even worse. So you're reducing some of the weight on the actual problems he's dealing with because you're adding in supernatural elements that are making them worse. And given the situation he's in and the news he's just heard, it didn't have to be worse. He was already in a horrible place. And the same even goes for later when they escape, Qrow being out of it in the bar. It's not good, but it does make sense. And again, I really can't blame him for doing that. You can't be too mad about it. And the problem with that is it takes away from making alcohol the issue. Obviously it is an issue and they almost get in trouble because he was drinking, but he was drinking for pretty legitimate reasons and there were supernatural forces at bay. So it's taking away from that being the core of the problem for Qrow. Honestly, the best thing at the farm, the best handled thing at the farm to do with it was RWBY. RWBY handled it really well. She's mad at the situation, but she's not mad at the man. You know, she's mad at the alcohol bottle, but she doesn't yell at Qrow or blame him. She offers him support. She says you can talk to her. She tries to be positive, a positive influence, which in that situation is pretty much the best thing you can do, whether it works or not. And there are lots of people saying, oh, you know, Qrow nearly getting everyone killed because he was drunk, which isn't a really fair assessment of the situation, but it is a contributing factor. That's what helped him stop drinking. But it didn't. They went to the next town, and they were a lot safer than they'd been before, and they saw that their only path forward had been shut off, and Qrow went and got drunk, which again, makes sense for someone with a severe alcohol problem. That's how he's dealing with the problem, and again, they're all pretty safe right now. Or at least as safe as they can reasonably be. Not to mention nothing has happened to help his overall thoughts about the meaning of his life and Oz lying to him and everything going wrong. And now their, again, way forward has just been cut off. So things are looking worse. So as you'd expect, the deeply depressed alcoholic goes and wipes himself out again, completely writing himself off and falling asleep outside on the steps. That is pretty expected, and Yang says it's the worst she's seen him. Again, makes sense. All of this so far lines up as a pattern of behavior and I can believe it. And then they get into a fight, they save the day, and there's no real issues, and he just quits on the spot. That's just, what? There is no way that this would ever work for so many reasons. It's why most people are utterly confused at Qrow saying he gave it up in 7. I've watched a lot of reactions. Everyone was like, what? Oh, he did? I thought he was just, working on it. And that's what it implied. Like, oh, I don't need this right now. I'm not depressed right now. Things are looking up. I can put this flask away. But that doesn't mean he's quitting stone sober on the spot. Do you know how low the success rate for that is? And he didn't even have good motivation to do it. But what's most insulting is that that's the resolution to this fight. Somehow this is what resolved it for him. All those issues and struggles, let alone the chemical side of things. I see people saying that it was because the people nearly died when he was drunk, but it wasn't. He continued drinking after that. If anything, the depressed state that would put on you for making that issue is likely to make you drink more. Sounds counterproductive, but that's how it works. But even if you interpreted it that way, it still doesn't work. You can say that it's for the benefit of RWBY, Yang, and the others, and he might be able to stretch and say he'd try that. That still would never make this work. They still never gave him a focus in that fight to resolve what he just did. Yeah, they were fighting for their lives. Yeah, he was worried about RWBY. Yeah, he thought she might be dead for a second. But none of it was his fault. He didn't save the day and it was like, oh, I have to have a clear head to save the day because he saves the day drunk all the time. Outside of a small victory and everyone being safe again as usual, nothing really changed it for him. It would have made more sense if actually RWBY was severely hurt and it was because Qrow was drunk. And it wasn't oh, that might have happened. It's, oh, I need to change things because it's hurting people. That I could maybe believe, but it wasn't anything like that. So my problem with it is not how it was portrayed, it's how it was resolved. That's a little frustrating given it was a consistent key part to his character, and he's a consistent side character who travels with the main party. He's someone we're quite invested in, and you resolve a key part of his character arc like that. This has been a 3-volume build to this, and it wasn't even clear he was quitting. He just looked like he was thinking about improving or that he was okay for the moment. At the end of Volume 6, this quite annoyed me. But now we get into Volume 7, and I actually have to commend things again because they did some things right again. Well, okay, it would have actually been nicer to see some of the horrific withdrawals he would have gone through if he'd actually tried that. Taking it as someone who presumably has drunk pretty much permanently for at least 15 years, given a rough estimate to someone's disappearance, if you were to believe that was the catalyst for it, which makes sense. If not, it was from before that, which makes it even worse. But yeah, 15 years of being nearly permanently drunk or having alcohol in your system at all times, and then you quit. That would destroy you, especially in the short term. So, but okay, cartoon, we're not going into all that, we don't have time, it's not the Qrow show, we can't keep watching everything Qrow does at all times. We assume he went through some withdrawals in the background while the team was training. That's fine, I can deal with that. But what they actually did right was 2 things. The first is introducing a major positive influence in the form of Clover. That really helps. Again, not going into however you want to read their relationship, not really important here. The point is, it's a very positive person for Qrow, who tells him to think better about himself, to not deflect compliments, to get out of a depressive state of mind and be helpful and give him hope. That's really good. The second is Qrow actively removing himself from temptation when he saw the wine, knowing he wouldn't last long around it, because that's something you have to do. These are very good things and I commend them both. So if you combine that with wanting to protect RWBY and Yang and the rest of them, that makes a lot of sense to why he would be in a better place. So why am I bringing this up now? Yeah. So here's the thing, if your opinion as a viewer is that you don't want to see Qrow go back to drinking because that feels like ground we've already covered and it feels like the character's going backwards and it's repetitive, I can see that argument. I understand. But I gotta tell ya, I strongly disagree. I actually commented at the time it happened, it's somewhat silly that Qrow has this reaction, because there's no way he'd be getting reception at all if she did make it through to Vacuo, which was the plan. Qrow also presumably had no communication into the central location at all, because that also makes no sense. As far as Qrow is concerned, this pretty much is exactly what's meant to happen, minus the Aesop's being there. However, as a concerned guardian relative, I understand him making this outburst in the moment because it's a confronting sight. In fact, I can see him making this call, this outburst, hoping not to hear a response, because that's a good indicator that they're not still there. So, I can even buy that. And now they would head to Vacuo. It's a logical place to go, the Huntresses are there, presumably the team is there, so they fly off that way. It's the only thing that really makes sense for them to do. And it makes a lot of sense that Qrow would be worried the whole flight over. He'd be worried, hoping that they're all okay and having to wait to get there to find out. But he's got Robin by his side to reassure him. She's a positive person, another positive influence on his life, which is good. All of that makes sense. However, once he does arrive and he finds out that RWBY and Yang are gone and presumed dead, along with the portal and the rest of her team, Penny and Jean, as well as not having either relic in their possession anymore, if you try and tell me Qrow doesn't fall off the wagon harder than anyone in history, it'll be the dirtiest thing ever done to a character outside of Rule 34. Because let me be clear, this was promising, and this was a slap in the face. But if he doesn't fall back on booze after losing all of that, it'll be an absolute disaster to his character. Qrow already shouldn't be just fine giving up how he did. But you know what? Animated show, side character, that's fine. But losing Yang and RWBY, feeling like he's failed the two people that matter the most to him in his entire life, the people that mean more to him than anything in the world, the people who are the legacies of his friends, especially one who is gone now. Person with already that much sadness, who also just went through losing the best influence he's had on his life in many years and feeling that he too was partially to blame for that. At that point, Robin could be a literal magical being of positivity and it wouldn't do anything compared to the effect this would have on Qrow. And on top of everything, Salem's got the relics and Atlas has fallen. So everything's gone. Qrow should be drowning in alcohol. It would actually be nonsensical if he wasn't, as far as I'm concerned. But here's the weird thing about that. It would be a really good thing. And I don't say this frivolously, I'm not joking. Just like everyone else, I want good things for Qrow. I like Qrow, I do. I don't want to see him fall back on destructive habits, but just because I don't want to see him do that doesn't mean it shouldn't happen or would happen. He should be back on the booze, harder than ever, wallowing in depression and hate, pushing away those around him destructively, no matter who they are. It would be the best thing for him as a character, so that it still feels like he's a character, and we can tell some stories. Having him initially get over his struggle the way he did was one thing, but to face him with all this new level of loss and failure and pain, and pretend that his alcohol dependency just didn't exist and it's just gone now, it never happened, that would be the most insulting way he could handle it. Because that just makes it seem like, oh, it's just gone, he's fine, he chose to not drink and now he's fine, despite all this has just happened to him. His history and his flaws should always be remembered and factored in because he's a person. Sure, he's been clean for however long they are at Atlas, a few months or whatever that was. That time frame is nothing compared to the years he was dependent and using it to cope and self-medicate, with situations that weren't as bad as this. But I'm not here to just be preachy about alcoholism, not at all actually. Let's examine the story because there's a lot we can do with this. I label this as a Volume 9 discussion, but as we all know, it's pretty uncertain how the volume will be structured and where the focus will be, and we've talked about that a lot before. However, it works either way, whether we see all this happen or simply the aftermath and we learned that it happened, it still serves the plot more if Qrow goes off the deep end. Put it this way, if Qrow is fine and alcohol just doesn't come up again, then you have clean Qrow, and he just keeps working and doing his job and fighting. thing. Or you have like Mad Qrow and he goes insane and starts trying to kill people and bad guys and goes off on his own or something. Both of those, not very interesting, probably end up with him being dead or him just being the same. Don't get much out of that. And while I actually do support the idea of Qrow and Robin together, if only just because I want more positive influences in Qrow's life, because I want nice things for him, I am very much against it mattering more than Qrow being a character. So I don't think Robin's presence should outweigh all this negativity at all, whether it's romantic or just as a friend or whatever. She's not that influential. She can't be. And there are more lingering questions of would this even happen in Volume 9, because we don't know things like how long does it take to fly to Vacuo? Would they even get there this season? I don't know. Will we see Vacuo this season even? I don't know, but I couldn't label it as anything else, because it's just the next volume that's coming up and it's the next thing in our timeline. And he wouldn't be drinking beforehand, even if he's worried, because he said he's quit, he doesn't have any confirmation that they're supposedly dead, and the military transport ship wouldn't have a bar for him to indulge in anyway. However, when he does get there and finds out what happened, he should absolutely fall down that hole we've been discussing. This does things for our story. One is, it takes away a very useful agent in Qrow for the good guys. If he's constantly trashed and abrasive and reclusive, then the good guys can't use him as much, both in combat and in scouting, which he's very good at. This makes life a lot harder for our heroes, and that's a good thing for making story. And that counts especially if you have people like Tyrion and Mercury about to make a move. They're not Salem levels of powerful or even Cinder levels of powerful, so to make them more threatening, take away some of the help. And one of those people is Tyrion, so we have Tyrion and Qrow around each other, and you could have Qrow getting reckless or being impaired with that possible fight looming. It could be very interesting. Plus, we do have this Robin thing. No matter how that relationship is, friends or otherwise, does she try and help him? Does he push her away completely? Is she forced to give up on him to help everyone else and she hates that? Or does she grow to hate him because he won't help himself? These are interesting character questions that could really help establish more about Robin as a character if she's going to be around. Also, Nora, Ren, and Oscar, do they try and help? Does he push them away? Winter is here too, they have a history, same questions. As a long-term character, all of these things would be good to see and good to know about Qrow. But again, it's not the Qrow show. I'm not saying he should be the focus of the season, but you could tell it without even showing much, honestly. Show how bad he is just once or twice, and then just show that he's not around, and boom, job done, at least for one season. Because while building character and learning things about Qrow and just making story is great, what we're really building to, obviously, is RWBY's return. That's where you pay everything off. Even if there's a time skip and we didn't see Vacuo at all, you can still tell this whole story in simply one scene by having RWBY return, and while she's greeting everyone, Qrow isn't there and she asks, "Where's Qrow?" Everyone gets quiet and awkward. Someone like Robin answers but has a bit of a short, snippy reply. You know, clearly something's gone wrong there, there's a soured relationship. Then, cut to a dark, dingy room, and the door cracks open and it's RWBY. She's looking into the room and the light spills in, and a delirious, bleary-eyed, shaggy Qrow barely lifts up his head to see RWBY's shape in the doorway. She's out of focus, his vision is blurry, his head is ringing from a hangover, he's unkempt with like the start of a beard growing in, clothes are all beat up, he's clearly landed in Vacuo, heard the news and just spiraled ever since. From there, you can do some really good things. Most of all, you can have these moments actually mean something and get rid of the insult that was him getting over it the first time. This whole story you can tell in 3 scenes without being the focus and taking away from anything, and we see Qrow pick himself back up properly. If you want to restore hope in the character, then one of the best ways to do that would have him literally have hope restored. To have his hope brought back to life by RWBY, who, as in the story, is the spark of hope, returns to him from seemingly the impossible. If you want a real motivation to get him started on his journey to cleaning up, then that's it. Then to follow up, we see a sheepish and embarrassed Qrow walk up to people and apologize to them. It could be Winter or Oz or whatever, but the best one is obviously Robin, because we don't really know what happened between them, but we have implied story, and then when they have a conversation, obviously we as the audience see it, and that fills us in on whatever happened, whatever it may have been, it doesn't matter. Which is an important step to actual recovery, trying owning the things you did, and apologizing to people you've hurt, and trying to make up for it, and trying to be a better person and making promises to people you intend to keep. That's a really important thing, and that can really help people. So he's already doing it the right way and doing it a way that might actually work. And from there, Qrow can work himself back to being useful. We can do the cleaning him up montage and gets a new outfit and he's got a new outlook on life and he has his hope restored and he's getting over his addiction problems and he heads back into the story, probably heading back towards the last relic sort of portion of the timeline. If you want the big character overcoming moment, you could then also tell that with a final final triumph against Tyrion, and that marks his big turning around point. You could tell this all pretty easily, as a sign of him being cleaned up and being competent again. He finally has his showdown with Tyrion and he wins, and Tyrion dies, and we move into the last stage of the plot. That's all pretty simple and helps redeem that whole storyline and makes things work. But before we wrap up, let's actually talk about some other possibilities, because you can do other things with wasted Qrow if we are going to get some focus on him. And what that is, if they want to finally do it, is Team Stark stuff. No, I have no idea when that will come up, but you have a lot of potential to do it here if you'd like. There's a lot of ways it can happen, but this would help. For example, Raven portals into Qrow because her connection with Yang is suddenly gone, and she's going to blame Qrow because she now thinks Yang is dead, or at least she wants answers about what happened. That confirms for Qrow that Yang is dead in his mind, and that's a great way to start him spiraling. Another, again, is Raven portals over slightly later, maybe not realizing straight away and figuring it out later that she's gone. Again, she goes to Qrow to check on what's going on and finds him completely wrecked. He's already spiraled and gotten drunk, and then she comes in and he's already completely wasted. After finding him completely smashed, they start an argument. It's a good way to do this. They start ranting at each other, especially drunk Qrow, going off about their history and what happened in their past, and that can give us at least starter hints about those things they might then talk about later. And just because it would be a nice callback, you could have them positioned and use the camera and the situation to mirror what happened at their last time talking, which, hey, was at a tavern. Except here they'd be totally alone, but in a similar position, because Qrow would be drinking alone at the table probably, and she would come to him this time, and things mirror it visually, but the situation is completely backwards, which is fun. The demeanor of both is completely different, everything significantly changed. Rather than being secretive with each other and snarky and making jokes, seeing them this way, they would have their guard down, and they'd be emotional and vulnerable, and actually alone, so they can just go all out with what they say to each other. Secondary versions of both of these scenarios can be done involving Ty as well. Raven can very easily, theoretically, just portal to him, grab him, and take him back through her portal to Qrow, if you want to expand on that idea and bring the remaining Team Stark together. And that could be really emotional and meaningful. You might think Raven just wants to perhaps talk to Ty about Yang, but when Ruby's involved, having Qrow there as well, who looked out for Ruby a lot, that would be interesting to have that team dynamic returned, and then maybe Stark stuff could come out if you want to go into it. In fact, they could spend the night in Memoriam, drinking and talking about their past and how they got here. There you go, there's your Team Stark flashback, nice and easy. Or the other version where you don't see Vacuo at all, you can still do it, because when Ruby returns, finally you have that meeting, and through an outburst of tears and sobs and relief, then Qrow can pour his heart out to her, what he thought when she was gone, and saying how he thought he lost Ruby just like losing Summer, and they go into backstory. You can all do that too. There's a lot of potential you can get out of a very compromised Qrow, and he has a perfectly logical setup to get there. And I'd like to say that while it isn't a happy thought for Qrow to go down this path, it's not his end either. He shouldn't drink himself to death or anything, because while that's also believable, it wouldn't serve the story at all. Having Ruby return to find out that Qrow drank himself to death in sadness and we didn't get to see it, and Tyrion fight never happened and any of that, yeah, that would be terrible. We're not going to do that. We don't gain anything from that except misery. That's way too far. Because at the end of the day, all I really want actually has nothing to do with alcohol and alcohol issues. All I actually want is justice for Qrow as a character, and that can be in the form of bad things happening if they make sense. As a character, this is absolutely what would and should happen, so I hope they capitalize on it and keep Qrow being Qrow. Not keep him drunk, but keep him as someone with severe alcohol issues, who has a history of this, who's trying to stay sober and then is hit with the worst news ever. What would happen? Logical next steps. Qrow's a human being and a character. That's what would happen. Not doing it is removing who Qrow is as a character, and that therefore devalues all those issues you apparently wanted to talk about. And doing it opens up a lot of potential for your story. It's consistent, and past that, if there is any investment or care with dealing with those things relating to real issues, then it basically gives you a second chance, because this one then kind of doesn't matter. It's just him trying to go cold turkey and then horrible things happen and he fails. Because also, it's not just Qrow they messed this up for. They also handled Willow's alcoholism just as poorly. Which I'm not going to break down detail for detail because it's not completely relevant here, but yeah, they also did not handle hers very well at all. So she also better not suddenly be completely fine either, by the way. I didn't forget about her. If they weren't both in such a bad place and absolute wrecks, it would almost be nice to see them sharing a depressed drink together. But both of them seem far too much the loner type to be drowning their sorrows together than more the recluses, which makes a lot of sense. But the point is, the only chance they have at convincing me this wouldn't happen is saying Vacuo is a dry country that has outlawed alcohol. Except they've pretty much already shown that it isn't with this on the short on Vacuo, unless they want to retcon that, but otherwise there's no reason either of these people should be sober, but especially Qrow. So again, while it's not a happy idea, it really is the right idea for Qrow. As much as I want good things for him, in the end he really should be wrestling with a few more demons before he finds those things. I may want him to be happy, but I want him to remain true to his character even more, so it feels like it's actually him that gets those nice things and not someone else we've invented who doesn't have these issues. Even though he's totally gonna die before the end of the story anyway, I'm sorry, that's just still gonna happen, I think. And just like it's not a happy idea for Qrow, this also wasn't a happy video, so I'm sorry for the real talk, but I think it's very interesting. Because touching on real stuff should never ruin a show, but also don't touch on that real stuff if you don't want it to be real. I don't believe in criticizing everything a show does if it's not done perfectly, especially when it's not core to the show or core to your main characters. But as soon as you start treating it real, once you start portraying it as serious, it then moves into the area where we should critically look at it and see how it's being handled. And that's definitely the point I feel this topic has reached, so I thought it was worth discussing. However, that is all for now. So until next time, my name is RWBY, I hope you have a wonderful day, please drink responsibly, and I hope I did alright.